This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Garrett. Funded in part by
TheStreet.com and Action Alerts Plus, where Jim Cramer and fellow portfolio manager Stephanie Link share their investment strategies, stock picks, and market insights. You can learn more at TheStreet.com/NBR.
Still running, the Dow ends higher again, this time the index having its strongest 6-day streak in more than 4 years.
Different views. Stocks are sitting at or near record levels. The economy seems to be gaining strength as well. But do Wall Street and Main Street see things the same way?
And crowdfunding a cure, how hope and generosity are working toward ending a deadly disease. We have all that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, December 24th. Good evening, everyone, and happy Christmas Eve.
Yes, I'm Bill Griffith, wishing you a happy holiday. Tyler Matheson is off today. We did have another record-breaking session on Wall Street, but just barely this time, as the Dow did edge to a fresh closing high, extending last week's rally. With the markets closing early ahead of the holiday at 1 o'clock Eastern time today, stocks faded into the close, ending mixed and little changed. Here's how the major averages ended this quiet day on the street. You'll understand what I'm talking about when you see that the Dow was up 6 points, was much stronger than that earlier. Any positive close, though, good enough for a record high. It's the sixth straight gain we've seen for the Dow. The Nasdaq was up 8 points when all was said and done, but the S&P snapped a 5-day winning streak, losing a fraction of a point on the close. In the widely followed energy markets, a rising U.S. dollar and a sizable jump in U.S. crude inventories sent oil prices lower today. Unused U.S. stockpiles rose by 5.5 million barrels last week, when analysts had been expecting a decline in those inventories. And with domestic crude oil fell more than $1, closed at $55.84 a barrel. Brent North Sea crude in London was also down more than $1. That closed at $60.24 a barrel.
Well, with stocks marching toward record highs as the calendar ticks down to 2015, there's a lot of talk about Wall Street being in a so-called Santa Claus rally. Dominic Chu has more on what's behind the year-end run-up in stocks.
'Tis the season for turkey, ham, candy canes, and stocks. The holiday season's been known to bring the gift of market returns, oftentimes referred to as the Santa Claus rally. So, what does Kris Kringle have to do with the stock market? Anecdotally, traders believe that more often than not, stock prices rise between Christmas Day and New Year's Day. It's not clear exactly what fuels the rally. Maybe it's got something to do with people getting their annual bonus check, or maybe everyone's just full of holiday cheer. These days, the term Santa Claus rally has pretty much referred to any kind of bullish stock move in the final 2 months of the year. According to analysts at Bespoke Investment Group, over the last century, the month of December has brought an average gain of around 1.4%, and it's been positive 73% of the time. No other month even comes close to that kind of consistency for higher returns. There's no guarantee on what happens in the future, but Wall Street hopes that Santa leaves gifts and not coal for investor stockings.
More good news today about jobs as well. Initial jobless claims fell by another 9,000 last week. So how's that going to contribute to growth into December's jobs report? And what is the labor outlook as we head into 2015? Hampton Pearson takes a look.
In 2014, the job market has been on the economic equivalent of a personal training program. And the latest data is showing newfound strength. First-time claims for unemployment benefits fell to 280,000 last week. The fourth straight week, claims have declined.
It is a good sign, and this is consistent with the labor market improving. To some extent, the job market was really a missing piece in the recovery.
In December of last year, overall job growth was anemic. Employers adding just 84,000 workers to payrolls. Last month, a blockbuster, 321,000 new jobs, moving the average for the last 3 months to nearly 280,000, part of the best year for job growth in more than a decade. Looking ahead to 2015, leading economists see more jobs, lower unemployment, and yes, wage growth.
The unemployment rate is just now approaching levels that have been consistent with an increase in average hourly earnings in prior cycles. And of course, we're also seeing non-farm payroll growth that's really pretty robust, and that is absorbing a lot of the surplus labor. So a year from now, I think we'll be at 3% or maybe a little bit higher on average hourly earnings.
And what are the concerns about Washington from those leading economists? Their advice: do no harm. There are concerns the Federal Reserve could move too quickly to raise interest rates, or that a gridlock Congress would fail to act on tax reform or infrastructure to help build on the momentum already being created in the private sector. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson in Washington.
And also, more good news for a lot of U.S. workers as we ring in the new year, especially at the nation's largest private employer. Walmart says it needs to raise base salaries for employees at more than 1,400 stores, about a third of its U.S. locations, because 2015 will bring mandatory minimum wage hikes in 21 states.
And of course, as we've been reporting, the stock market continues to shatter records. The U.S. economy is all revved up, and Wall Street investors are exuberant. But are ordinary Americans on Main Street feeling as good as Wall Street is right now? Let's talk about that. Joining us tonight to talk about it, Chris Christopher is Director of U.S. Consumer Economics at IHS Global Insight, and Jim Lowell, Chief Investment Officer at Advisor Investments. Good to see you both. Thank you for joining us. Chris, you know, the stock market, the old saying is the stock market is not the economy. It's not even a reflection. It's supposed to anticipate what's going on down the road. Do you think that the stock market is too optimistic about what the economy will look like down the road?
Well, the stock market represents a certain part of the economy. However, median household income adjusted for inflation is still about 8% below where it was in 2007, 2008. So Wall Street's doing well. However, Main Street, or your typical American household, is still struggling.
And struggling in which way, Chris?
Well, their incomes are not growing very fast, and most of the income growth we've seen in the United States is in the top 5%. However, recently, pump price relief and also pretty good employment reports are making all types of Americans a little bit happier.
What do you think, Jim? Are Wall Street and Main Street telling two different stories right now?
No, I don't think so. I think Chris is exactly right. The most recent data, whether it's the jobs data, whether it's income, spending, sentiment, savings, are all beginning to trend a little bit more favorably in terms of the overall U.S. consumer. And I agree that it's certainly been the top end that's benefited the most. Nevertheless, I think the trend going into 2015 is that the overall consumer is going to feel a little bit better about their prospect for being able to hold on to their job or trade up to a better one. And that typically translates into a little bit more spending. In the immediate start of 2015, maybe Wall Street's a little bit ahead in terms of price direction. I still expect we see some sort of pullback, but the overall catalyst, the driver for both our economy and I would argue for the market gains remains the U.S. consumer. So if they're okay, I'm okay.
You know, Jim, as we see all of these stock market records, a lot of people have benefited from it, not necessarily the individual investor. I mean, since the financial crisis 5 years ago, a lot of people pull their money out. Their retirement funds are not increasing with the way the markets are going. I mean, what's your take on the individual investor and the mood there?
Susie, you're exactly right. We constantly say it's time in the markets, not market timing, and they're just terrible examples of many investors bailing out when they basically should be getting back in or investing in only one thing where they should be reasonably well diversified. We have seen this year, obviously, the S&P 500 just trump everything. I mean, up almost 15% year to date if you include the total return number and compare that to the EFA, the broad measure of the international markets, down about 5% for the year. So investors who only invested in that one index are probably feeling pretty smart. But over rolling time periods, 3, 5, 10 year, a diversified basket makes sense. And now, with everybody fearing Europe, is probably a pretty good time to check under that hood.
Chris, as we've all mentioned, wage growth on Main Street has not been there. It's been pretty stagnant. But just lately, and I realize this is only anecdotal, but we've heard stories about wages going up. At Walmart, they're going to make adjustments there because the minimum wage is going up in 21 states. American Airlines, their bottom line has been so strong that CEO Doug Parker is giving their flight attendants an additional 4% increase in their wage on top of a 10% increase they were going to get anyway. My question is, do you think we're going to start to see more wage increases coming down the pike in 2015?
Yes, we sort of see it a little bit right now, and in 2015, things will be better on the consumer side, on the wage side. In addition, because of pump price relief, lower gasoline prices, whatever wage growth we do have, a given wage will go further.
Chris and Jim, I'd like to get your thoughts on both of this. We hear from a lot of, anecdotally, from a lot of people and some surveys that say that the American dream is beyond the reach of the new generation of Americans. What do you think, Chris, and then Jim?
Well, recently we've seen a rise in student loan debt. It's over $1 trillion. A younger age cohort in the United States is sort of struggling. A lot of them don't leave the nest in any way after college. So that is changing a bit. So they're not doing as well as their parents or grandparents are doing, but things are starting to improve, and eventually they will make some traction in the economy.
Mm-hmm. Jim, your thoughts?
I think the American dream is just that. It's a goal. The reality is, of course, day to day, year in, year out, it's a long road to being able to really succeed well. And so I would encourage everyone to, if they have one job, look for a second job, build that dream brick by brick. It's the only way you're going to make it a reality.
All right. Chris Christopher from IHS Global Insight, Jim Lowell from Advisor Investments. Good to see you both. Merry Christmas. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Big news from Sony Pictures about its controversial comedy, The Interview, after it canceled the film's debut last week because of threats from hackers. Well, starting today, Sony will make the satire available for purchase online through a host of services, including Google Play, YouTube, Xbox Video, and the dedicated website, seetheinterview.com. For anyone else who wants to see the flick, Sony is allowing 200 U.S. theaters, all small chains and art house cinemas, to show The Interview as originally scheduled starting on Christmas Day. The company is also in talks with Netflix to stream the movie. But if a deal comes together, it will not be ready for release by tomorrow.
Meantime, more troubles for the ride-sharing service Uber. South Korea has now indicted Uber CEO Travis Kalanick and that country's Uber office for what they call violating a law governing public transport. Prosecutors say that Uber's local service did not have the appropriate licenses to provide or facilitate transportation services. In a statement, Uber says its service is legal in Korea and that it's being welcomed and supported by consumers there.
You don't need a smartphone app to tell you that this is one of the busiest travel days of the year, but some wicked weather is making it tough for millions who are trying to get home for the holidays. Kate Rogers has more.
Have a holly jolly Christmas this year.
Another holiday, another headache for travelers. This Christmas Eve, two separate storm systems bringing rain, wind, and fog to the Northeast, heavy snowfall and precipitation expected in the Midwest, and even more rain in the Pacific Northwest. Unwelcome news for travelers on one of the busiest days of the year. AAA reports 98 million people will travel this holiday week, and 5.7 million will do so by plane. But passengers at LaGuardia Airport were hopeful the weather wouldn't stand in their way.
I was glad the weather was okay, no snowstorms or anything.
I'm actually headed to Iowa through Chicago today.
And how is everything on time?
It looks like it's on time so far. They're saying rain, but maybe in Chicago there might be a little bit of a delay, but so far it looks pretty good.
Were you nervous at all flying on Christmas Eve that you might not make it?
No, I've done it before, and I didn't make it once, but I feel confident today.
Christmas Day travel also looking far more optimistic.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history.
Were you nervous at all with sort of weather issues across the
No, you kind of prepare for the worst and get pleasantly surprised.
We expect the wind and the rain to sort of moderate overnight, and actually tomorrow we might see that strange light in the sky that we know as the sun. So we're hoping that travel won't be affected tomorrow.
Meanwhile, many of the air carriers are waiving fees for passengers making last-minute changes ahead of the storms. The silver lining for many travelers, a drop in fuel prices. The national average for gasoline just $2.35 per gallon, meaning more people hitting the roads. This holiday, we're seeing plenty of motorists, grounded planes, and perhaps for some, a white Christmas. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Kate Rogers in New York.
Coming up, what the most popular high-tech gifts will be this holiday season and whether they or any of your other gifts will get to their destinations on time. Another legal setback for MF Global. You'll remember that this is the bankrupt trading firm once run by former U.S. Senator John Corzine. The firm folded in 2011 after losing billions in bad trades. Well, today, MF Global was ordered to pay $1.2 billion in restitution to its former customers, along with a $100 million penalty for misusing customer money.
All right, switching now to technology and what are certain to be some of the hottest high-tech toys found under the tree this year. Here's Josh Lipton with more.
Tech spending during the holidays will reach a record $33.8 billion, according to the Consumer Electronics Association. So what will be the hottest tech gifts? The consumer drone market is soaring. But one problem can be the price of those unmanned aerial vehicles. That's especially a worry for rookies who might crash and break their drones on the first flight. One answer? Buy a small, cheaper drone like the Hubsan X4, which sells for about $40 on Amazon.
All the propellers and the pieces all come in easy replacement kits and you can fix it yourself. So it's a great way to start flying a drone if you've never done it before.
Wearables are also all the rage, with the Apple Watch expected early next year. But there are options already available.
This is the Moto 360 here.
Such as the Moto 360, which costs $250. Fans appreciate its design and all the usual features of a smartwatch, including notifications, voice control, and apps.
So it'll work with almost any Android phone that was made in the last year or so. So odds are, if you have an Android phone, it'll work with this. But if you have an iPhone, you're still sort of stuck just getting a picture of the Apple Watch this year for Christmas.
Finally, GoPro is expected to enjoy a big holiday season. The company now offers models at multiple price points, ranging from $130 to $500.
GoPro is the market leader when it comes to action cameras. There are competitors. Sony has an action camera, Garmin has an action camera, and there are others as well. But GoPro really established itself in the market really early on.
So the expectation is that drones, wearables, and action cameras will all find a lot of new fans this holiday season. An added bonus, they're all easy to stuff in a stocking. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Josh Lipton in Silicon Valley.
A nice holiday present for American Airlines flight attendants, and that's where we begin tonight's Market Focus. As Bill mentioned earlier, the airline announced that it plans to hike wages for flight attendants by 4% thanks to stronger profits and falling oil prices. Plummeting energy prices have drastically reduced costs for the airline, which is poised to save more than its competitors because it did not hedge against prices rising. Shares were up about 2.5% to $51.43. Investors got their first chance to react to earnings from Cal-Maine Foods, and they dumped shares in today's session. The nation's largest egg producer missed Wall Street's earnings expectations, and the company also warned that its results could be impacted by new rules for egg producers in California. Shares tumbled about 4% to $42.45. Norwegian Cruise Line says an engine room fire that took one of its ships out of service will shave 5 cents off earnings in both its fourth and first quarters. That fire forced the complete cancellation of one cruise and part of another. But despite that, shares rose slightly today to $47.66.
Elsewhere, Novo Nordisk also saw its shares rise after that company got the okay from the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA clearing the company's injectable diabetes drug as a treatment to fight obesity here in the United States. As a result, shares of Novo Nordisk popped by more than 2% today to $43.67. And Citi is going to sell its Japanese retail banking operations, according to reports. That sale will be to Japan's Sumitomo Bank for about $330 million. All of this comes as Citi's Japan consumer banking business has been hurt by weak loan demand and falling interest rates in that country. Shares were up slightly, though, to $54.54. And TECO Energy says it has agreed to extend the closing date for the sale of its coal mining business by about 2 months. That sent shares higher today. That company said in October that it would be selling its coal subsidiaries for about $170 million because of the market slump in coal. Shares were up about 2% today to $20.53.
The clock is ticking and the big day is nearly here. That means millions of package deliveries should be where they belong right about now. So how did the nation's shipping giants make out this year? Morgan Brennan takes a look.
It's the final countdown. Tens of millions of express packages need to be delivered today to avoid a repeat of last Christmas when 2 million shipments were late. The big difference this year, UPS and FedEx are saying no to some last-minute orders. Parcel carriers and retailers agreed to some limits ahead of the holidays, and now the shipping giants are refusing some packages above those limits. So how's it going for the packages they are delivering? Well, experts say it's going relatively well.
It couldn't be better than this to be performing at 99.6, 99.3 for these carriers. That is very, very impressive.
Overall this season, ShipMatrix says both FedEx and UPS have vastly improved their on-time delivery performance compared to last year. On Monday, UPS's projected busiest day, both companies got 98% of their shipments out on schedule, up from 90% last year. FedEx says weather's not having an impact, and both UPS and FedEx say operations are running smoothly given the high volume. Analysts note that up until this point, the extra workers, network upgrades, added planes and trucks all seem to be working. But there's one other name to watch today, and that's the U.S. Postal Service. It's been handling the lion's share of Amazon shipments this season, delivering on Sundays and on Christmas Day. Monday set a record for the Postal Service, 28 million packages delivered, 10% higher than last year and 5 days later than its projected busiest day. But again, it all comes down to tonight. And the big wild card is the bad weather affecting so much of the country right now. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Morgan Brennan in New York City.
Well, it's a Merry Christmas at Apple headquarters. That company's market cap went up by about $160 billion this year so far, at least. Some perspective, though. Only 24 companies in the S&P 500 have a total market cap of $160 billion. To put it another way, Apple's $660 billion market cap is more than that of Facebook, Google, Cisco, and Amazon combined. Not too shabby, huh? Apple shares were up about 40% in trading this year. Up next, how the gift of giving could help save lives. We'll explain coming up. Some older patents used in mobile devices apparently are still worth a lot of money, namely nearly $1 billion. A consortium including Apple, Microsoft, BlackBerry, Ericsson, and Sony sold off about 4,000 technology patents that they acquired a few years ago from the telecom company Nortel Networks after it went belly up. A patent management company called RPX Corp just paid $900 million for those patents. As for that group of tech titans, they are known as the Rockstar Consortium. They are holding on to 2,000 other Nortel patents.
And finally tonight, a Christmas Eve story about hope. Hope for a young woman battling a rare form of cancer and the hugely successful crowdfunding drive to raise money to research her illness and help find a cure. Meg Terrell has the story.
Just a month ago, Liza Heaton thought she had just weeks to live. Her synovial sarcoma, a rare cancer, had returned. 3 years after she beat it the first time.
It probably was one of the worst weeks of her life.
But Liza and her boyfriend Wyatt didn't want to waste the time they had left. The couple pulled together a wedding in 2 days, surprising friends and family. They also started a fundraising campaign to support research on Liza's cancer and other forms of sarcoma at Johns Hopkins, where she received treatment. There's no playbook for synovial sarcoma, and because they're so rare, sarcomas are often some of the last cancers for which new medicines are tested.
Normally speaking, the funding for sarcoma is sometimes as rare as the tumor itself. The generosity that she has shown will really serve as an incredible start and continuation of some of the research that's been going on at Hopkins in sarcoma and allow us to make more strides.
Liza initially thought they might raise a few $1,000s, but with help from a moving video made by her sister and friends, donations have skyrocketed to $350,000 in less than a week. Fundraising site GoFundMe said the Love for Liza campaign is among its fastest growing ever.
Certainly, I've never seen anything like it before.
As for Liza, everything changed the day after her wedding. Her condition improved enough to start treatment with chemotherapy. Now she's taking it month by month and hopes to continue to raise funds and awareness for rare sarcomas like hers. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Meg Terrell.
Great story and a great use for crowdfunding as well,
Hope
right?
It works out for her.
Exactly. That's a Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Bill Griffith. Thank you so much for watching, everybody.
And I'm Susie Garrett. Have a great evening, everyone, and Merry Christmas. We'll see all of you again tomorrow night.
Nightly Business Report has been funded in part by
TheStreet.com and Action Alerts Plus, where Jim Cramer and fellow portfolio manager Stephanie Link share their investment strategies, stock picks, and market insights. You can learn more at TheStreet.com/NBR.
I'm Susie Garrett with the Nightly Business Report News Brief. Another record-breaking session on Wall Street as the Dow edged to a fresh closing high, extending last week's rally. With the markets closing early ahead of the holiday, stocks ended little change despite good news about jobless claims and a rise in mortgage applications last week. The Dow rose by 6 points, hanging on to a sixth straight day of gains. The Nasdaq up by 8, but the S&P snapped a 5-day winning streak, losing a fraction of a point. Oil prices were lower after U.S. stockpiles of crude rose by 5.5 million barrels last week when analysts were expecting a decline. And Sony is selling its controversial movie, The Interview, through several streaming sites today and in 200 U.S. theaters on Christmas Day. Be sure to tune in to Nightly Business Report right here on your public television station.